So I'm getting away from the exhaust system for a while because I don't have any parts to complete it. So I'm going to work on the braking system, namely the master cylinder. So I bought this chrome master cylinder, and there are two connections there, two connections there, so obviously it's made to work in more than one application. In order to bleed it, they give you a couple of hoses, a couple of connectors for the hoses. The hoses get pushed on here, and then these are supposed to thread into the ports there, and they give you a clip to put on. Well, that's interesting. They give you a clip that's supposed to go on here to keep your hoses in position, submersed in the fluid. And I just tried to clip it on there, and it broke. Because this is much wider than that was. So I'm not exactly sure how you were supposed to clip this on. And keep those hoses submersed in the brake fluid as you bench bleed it. I'll have to figure something out. They do give you two plugs for the side that you're not using. And then they give you these two pieces with no instructions on what they're for or where they go. So I think I've decided that this piece goes in there, and then this piece goes in the brake booster and fits in that divot there. This end's flat, this is rounded, so that would work, I think. As usual, there's instructions to how to bleed this, but no instructions on what these are for, where they go. And they gave me a spare vacuum line connection to the brake booster. The vacuum line, or the brake booster, already had one on, so I guess that's an extra. Now, anything that you could have applied from the stock master cylinder, which kind of tells me that these are the sides that use the brake lines, and I can see the smaller fitting goes in the front and the bigger one in the rear. Just making sure that you can see that. Yes. But here's where it gets different. This is way different from what went into the brake booster on the stock one, because as you recall, this and this went together. So apparently the diaphragm in the brake booster is much closer to the master cylinder, the new brake booster. But there's one important thing that does not exist on the new one, so I hope they machined it exactly, because the old one actually has a threaded portion that you can grip this and get a little wrench and turn this, and you can lengthen and shorten this rod that pushes the piston in the master cylinder. So, and there are specs concerning clearance between these things. It's like single digit thousandths. But with no instructions, I'm not sure what if anything to do with that information. But one thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want, when you put these two pieces in, like so, you don't want pressure being applied to the master cylinder already. That would cause you to use up vacuum, I guess, in the booster. I don't know whether it actually leaks out when you press it or not, but so I think these are the sides I'm going to use. So I think the opposite side gets the plugs. They don't tell you what to do with the plugs either, but that's another issue. First thing that I need to do, though, they tell you to clamp it in a vise level in order to push in on this piston and bleed the master cylinder before you put it on the car. One of the reasons you have to do that is because you can clamp this in a vise level. You can't so much do it on the car because it's mounted at an angle. I think maybe you can do it if you can jack the rear end way up, but so in trying to figure out how to clamp this, there's not many options. I thought about clamping it between here and here, but then the tubes that need to be in there to bleed it would be basically pretty much in the jaws of the vise. You can't clamp it this way because, end to end, because then you can't push on the piston. Besides that, there's not many vices around that can clamp this distance from here to here. Even if you could clamp it on the body, not many vices will do that. So what I came up with is this little tab right here on the bottom is pretty flat. And at first I tried putting that in my vise with the soft jaws is to not scratch it or anything since it's chrome. I bought it for looks. But as soon as I tried to tighten it, it jumped out. So what I ended up with is a towel in the vise, and seems like it's going to work because I tried it. But basically put that little tab, and you only have a a small distance to work with. It's got to be hooked over here, because if you try to move the master cylinder further, the flange that mounts to the brake booster gets in the way and tilts it. So that seems pretty tight. Hopefully when I start to push on it, it won't move. But before I can do that, I want to connect the brake lines from the distribution block and put them up to where they're going to hook to the master cylinder. So there are two brake lines that go from that distribution block to the master cylinder, and they are labeled. It says line to master cylinder, line to distribution block, or distributor block, I guess it says, rear. Now I already put the front one on. And I'll point it out to you. It doesn't show up very well in the video, but here's the line going in. Now there will be a wire connecting to this terminal. It's right here. That's your brake switch. If you get a leak in one of the cylinders, wheel cylinders, it detects a difference between the pressure in the two lines and slides a switch here, grounds that out, completing the circuit, and your brake light comes on. So I'm not going to do that until later, and I'm just going to try to route this up there. And to be honest with you, I don't know where that's supposed to be up there. I don't know how close it is, so once I get these threaded, I'm going to have to look from the top and see what we've got. Appears to be started, but I want to make sure I get a couple good turns on it so that I don't have it cross-threaded. Last thing you want to do is run one of these brake lines. The front one, once I got it started, it went in nice. So I'm hoping for the same result on the rear one. Unfortunately, from this angle, it's hard to tell what vertical from that block is. Okay, as I move the line around so that it's not binding up against the fitting, I am able to thread this in by hand. So I've got a couple turns on it by hand. I'm pretty confident that it is threaded cleanly. In other words, not cross-threaded. So I'm not going to put that wire on yet because I've got to get a wrench on these to tighten them. But it's time to go up and see where they came out up top. I don't know how well this is focused because that chrome just makes the camera not want to focus, and I don't have a manual focus on it, unfortunately. But here's where my lines came up. Rear one, front one. And you notice I can wiggle them around. That will help me get them started into the master cylinder. And then there's a cover on the booster. Held on by the retaining nuts for the master cylinder. That piece of foam comes out. Huh. That is an interesting development because I think this booster has a it appears to have the plunger, if you will, already installed. So I guess that silver piece I was showing you before isn't used in all of the cases. Now, what I'm going to do, and I'm probably going to have to look at the video in order to see whether it's doing it, but pushing in on the brake pedal should push out on that. Rod. And since I'm by myself, I can't see that. Oh yes, I can see it because it didn't go all the way back in. There it goes. Now the question is that thing adjustable? Let's pop it out and see if we can pull it out since I was able to push it back in. Nope, no adjustment there. So, since there's no adjustment, the only way I could think you could adjust it is to make it shorter. You could grind off some of the rod. So I think we're set as far as what we can do here until we get the master cylinder bench bled and actually go through the install of it. Okay, so the first thing to prep the master cylinder, I've determined that this is where the brake lines are going to go, so the other side needs to be plugged. So I'm just going to put these plugs in, and I know you're not going to be able to see much of this operation, but it shouldn't take long, so I won't be ruining most of your day or anything like that. And I think I've come up with a way to clamp those bleeding lines onto the master cylinder while I bench bleed it. These fittings, I guess I should have shown you before, but they do have a flare type fitting that will mate with the flare type fitting in the other inside the master cylinder to seal that off, so that should be good. Now, as far as how am I going to keep this in place, I have the one end of the clip broke off and the other one I cut off. I broke it first and then cut it off, so that leaves me with a flat on the bottom. I hope to use this triangular part of the clip on the bail that holds the rear of the, if I can get it in there, the rear of the lid on. So hopefully, yeah, see that comes over. That should do. Now the instructions, what little they gave, they were all about bleeding. The instructions they gave, and I'll confirm this because I don't want to be wrong in going from memory. The instructions say to place your master cylinder in a vise, make sure it's level, attach a piece of clear plastic hose to the short end of one of the plastic nozzles and do the same for the other. So that is, I'm hoping I'm getting this in the frame. Basically attaching this on like that. So those are both attached. Clip the plastic bridge to the wall and push the ends of the hose through the hole so they're submerged in the reservoir. And then it says press the tapered end of the nozzle firmly into the cylinder porthole with a twisting motion. Repeat this procedure on the other side. So I thought it was telling me to screw it in, so it's a good thing I read it again, as I was going to consider doing this the opposite way. In other words, put the put this in here first. I'm going to have to Hope that's good enough. So again, I'm putting this into the front reservoir. Okay, because this isn't sealed, there shouldn't be a lot of pressure on those whenever I start to pump it. Let me grab a couple things and I'll be back. Okay, I wish I could show this to you as I'm pumping, but my vise is just too high. But you can see already, just with filling it with brake fluid, the bubbles are coming out, and there's no fluid in the tubes yet. So what you'll be able to see is when the fluid comes through the tubes and is bubble free. That's when we'll know we're done. What I have chosen as my blunt tool to press the master cylinder plunger in with is a 3/8 inch extension, and I've put on it my little ratcheting thumb screw thing. That's mainly to protect my hand, because it would be more painful pushing in on just the end of the extension. And I'm also wearing a fairly heavy glove. And so if I push it in, I can see a lot of bubbles coming in now, and it says to push it all the way. So I don't know if you saw that, but fluid actually came out there's some bubbles. And basically the idea is to continue to do this until there's no more bubbles. And you've got to keep the tubes submerged in the brake fluid, otherwise you'll just be sucking air back in. You can't see it, but in the front here where there's a hole, and I can't hold the camera and pump this at the same time, but there's a hole in there, and as I'm pushing the plunger in, bubbles are coming out of it as well. Still tiny bubbles in the... I'm trying to do this slowly to keep the agitation up to a fair minimum so that you don't have minute bubbles in the master cylinder. Okay, so you've seen the process here. I am going to shut the camera off, fill some more brake fluid in there because it's getting a little low, and then I will continue off camera to pump until it's totally free of bubbles. So I have pretty much got the bubbles out, but if you look at the front reservoir there, back one looks clear, front looks cloudy. Not only that, if you look close, you can see there's pieces of stuff floating in it. So I'm not going to put that on the car like that. So what I am going to do is I'm going to dump that into my oil pan so that it gets recycled, and clean out that reservoir and start over. But it will be the same process, so I'm not going to video it. I'll just continue to pump it till I get it free of bubbles and clear. Okay, I've done it a second time, and that front reservoir is still cloudy, but there's one thing I wanted to mention to you is when you fill up the reservoir to start this bleeding process, you need to leave 3/8 to a 1/2 inch of the reservoir empty in the top, because as you pump the thing and fluid flows in from here, it's emptying out this cylinder in here, so it's got to have room to go up, and then as you release it, it goes back down. But you don't want to fill it all the way, or you will be overflowing it. So I've got all the particles out of it, and the bubbles are gone. This is where it gets a little tricky, because I need to take these out, put the cap on, but keep those elevated so that they don't drain and let any air back into the piston. So there's going to be some that's going to go back in when you disconnect this to connect the brake line. That's unavoidable. They do tell you a way to bleed that air out, but in the meantime, I'm going to try to carefully get these out of here. And I got them around the bail, so I've got to take that out of there. Well, let's put it back up like that. Keep this elevated. I've got some brake fluid that I want to wipe off of here. And by the way, brake fluid will take paint off of your car in an instant, so you need to be very careful when you, well, maybe not an instant, but be very careful not to get any on it. Okay, so my plan is going to be to try and get this lid on. While holding these up, and then clip it to the bail. Like so. this other bail on. Okay, so the level is about there, so I don't think I sucked any air back in. Now to take it over to the car and get it connected. I'm going to try to do this without any additional lighting, because that seems to be what causes the camera to not be able to focus. So what I'm going to do is just carefully put this down onto the studs. I'm not bolting them in. Oops. And I already almost forgot something. I need to get that piece that goes inside there. Otherwise, when I press the brake, nothing will happen. Still recording, okay. So, this I want to be very careful to not lose. It goes in the end there. Okay. Now, question is, what's going to be my easiest fitting to connect first? And this is why I leave things loose, because neither one is what I'd call exactly lined up. As a matter of fact, you're not very close at all. But what I tend to do is leave those loose so that I can quickly, I can rotate the master cylinder a little bit, and I can get them threaded. So, and then using the master cylinder for leverage, I can push it onto the brake booster. So here goes nothing. I'm going to take the tube out. Should have gotten the wrenches and made sure I had the right sizes and such. This is never easy. There's not much room to work, and you're trying to do it quickly. And the things don't want to line up very well. This is always the most fun part about replacing a master cylinder. the rear one started. I want to make sure that I've got the threads all the way in. That they're not cross-threaded, but I don't want to tighten them too much because I'm going to have wiggle room to thread the front. So I'm satisfied that that's threaded in the back. To give my arms a break, I'm going to put it on the studs. See, once I get the front one threaded, I can put it on the studs and I can start those bolts. And those will flex somewhat. And there went my piece I need, because I dropped the darn thing. My hand's covered with brake fluid. I can't touch the car. Guess I'll turn off the camera while I fetch that piece. Okay, I located that piece, and instead of risking losing it again while I'm trying to hook up the front line, I put it with the two nuts that go onto the brake booster to hold the master cylinder on, so that I'll see it when I reach for a nut. So this is actually gotta figure out how I can work that in there. It's okay. Those tubes are gone for now. And what I've got to do is find a way to line up the front hose with the master cylinder, the brake line with the master cylinder, to get it threaded in. Buy the pre-bent brake lines to hopefully be able to get them on with not much hassle. And still they are a bear. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen. I'm going to get the tip of the line into the fitting, and then the fitting that's on the brake line won't be lined up exactly straight. That's the issue that you run into all the time with these. And this is why I connect them while the master cylinder is loose. It's almost impossible to bend those when you're trying to bend just the hose, the brake line. I know it's steel and you can't get a good grip on it, and all kinds of issues with it. Trouble is, if you leave them disconnected on the bottom side, you run into the same issue down there and you have even less room to work. Just gonna put this up here and try to rest for a bit. Never mind, I'll leave it down there. Gotta wipe my gloves off because they're full of brake fluid from handling that with those tubes once you disconnect them. So after about 15-20 minutes of struggling with that, I finally got it started. Now, that's the angle it was in when I finally got it started. So what remains to be done is get it mounted to the brake booster and put this piece in that fell out as I was struggling the first time. So that's in, and I need to kind of bend this around and see I can use the master cylinder as leverage to bend those brake lines. Now, as I was struggling with this, a thought occurred to me. They make the lines that go to the calipers, or where they need to flex to allow for travel of the suspension. They make those out of rubber. Why couldn't they make these out of rubber? It would make this job so much easier. Okay. Get one of these started. Okay, that one's started. Now if I can get this other one, and this is where you have to bend these lines to get them to be able to start. Some of that. Okay, I've got those started. Now that I've got those started, I'm going to bend the brake lines up a little bit to make them work underneath there. And now that that's done, I can tighten the flare nuts on the brake lines and get those snugged up and sealed while there's some movement available in both the master cylinder and the brake line. I believe these were both 9/16 and I'm using flare nut wrenches. to do this so that I don't round off the fittings. I'm probably not going to do it today because I have to figure out how I'm going to do it, but the next thing they tell you to do is to press the brake pedal and crack this open to let any air that's in there bleed out. No. I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to do that by myself. But I've got to figure a way. Okay. That should be seated up against that flare. Once these are seated up against the flare, then I can tighten it up to the brake booster. And those lines will flex in whatever way they need to flex. Maybe before I do that, I should go under and tighten the two on the distribution block to make sure that those are seated well. And then I won't be moving that connection. I'll only be able to flex the brake lines as I tighten it up. That sounds like a good idea to me. Okay. Put the car up and go under there. I'll take care of that before I finish tightening the master cylinder to the brake booster. Okay, sorry I didn't shut that off before. Maybe I'll edit that out, maybe I won't. I'm not going to show tightening those two underneath, and the reason is I showed you connecting them, and it was hard enough to get a camera angle without having a wrench in there and my hands trying to tighten it, so I don't think you'd see anything anyway. So I didn't record tightening the brake lines underneath because of the fact that it's hard to get in there anyways, and you probably wouldn't have seen anything once I got the wrench and my arms up in there. But there is one thing I wanted to show you. You need two different sizes of flare nut wrenches if you're doing this whole job. The 9/16 is needed on both of the ones on the master cylinder and on the front one from the distribution block, and a 7/16 is needed for the rear of the distribution block. And one of the things I wanted to point out about a flare nut wrench is you notice how it's almost like a box end 6-point, but it's got a slot in it so you can slip it around the tube and put it on the nut. But the big thing, a good set of these, if you look at the width of the flare nut wrench on the right versus a regular open-end wrench on the left, there's a lot more heft to this so that it can take a lot more torque without it spreading open and rounding off your nuts on your flare nut fitting. That didn't sound good at first, so I had to clarify. Now the only thing left to do, now that I've got those things seated on the fittings, is to tighten the master cylinder. And now, because all of those are seated on the fittings, what will flex here is the lines, not the flare fitting won't be affected by moving this master cylinder. So there's 2 bolts, one on each side, and it's going to take a while because there's not much of a swing, but this is it. That's all I'm going to be doing, is tightening these nuts with a ratcheting wrench. You can't get a socket in there. So as I said, the other side, or the next thing rather that I need to do, is I need to figure out how am I going to keep the brake pedal depressed while I come out here and crack these flare nut fittings open to bleed the last bit of air out. And now I guess it wouldn't be, you know what, I don't think I need to do that. And here's why. I think that they are giving you instructions based on you just replacing the master cylinder. I'm replacing the whole brake lines all the way back, including rebuilt calipers. So I'm not going to crack those. I'm just going to let the bleeding process force that air out like it normally would. But I have done that where you crack the fitting. I've done that when I've only replaced the master cylinder, so I understand what they're telling me to do. Just don't think in this situation that it's really necessary to do it. And I'm going to go, I'm almost done with this. For the last couple of turns, I'm going to use a regular box end wrench so I can get a little more leverage than, I think I have a longer one than these ratcheting wrenches. The last couple turns, like I said, I can use a regular box end. I don't want to use a open end because they can flex open a little bit if you're trying to get them really tight, which I do want my master cylinder to stay on. But now, if I would have tried to mount this master cylinder, this flex head on this ratcheting wrench is wanting to make it slip off when I put a lot of pressure on it if I move it a little bit. But that's going to be all I'm going to video. This is nice and tight as is. I just want to get it a little bit tighter, but I'm not going to do that on camera. So that's it for the installation of the master cylinder and the bench bleeding of it. And one of the things that I pointed out, right now I've got the back end of the car jacked pretty far up because I was working on the exhaust and I never moved it. But that master cylinder is pretty level the way it is. So even if I've gotten air in it, it will act as if I'm bench bleeding it, with the exception of, instead of feeding the fluid back into the reservoir, it will be sending it down the brake line and letting it out at the calipers. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Probably the next video will be actually bleeding the brakes, and I might show 2 or 3 different ways to do that.